It started as every Sunday morning did, quiet, reverent, almost fragile in its routine. The smell of incense drifted through the air like a memory trying to stay alive, clinging to the wooden pews and my coat as the last hymn faded into silence. I remember the sound of the organ's final note, trembling in the stillness, and the way the light spilled through the stained glass windows in fractured rainbows that painted the marble floor beneath my feet. For a moment, everything felt ordinary, sacred even. Michael had gone to confession that morning, just before Mass began, and though I hadn't thought much of it at the time, I would later replay that detail over and over again in my mind. The way he'd slipped into the confessional booth early, his hand brushing mine gently as he passed, his lips curving into a small, distracted smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I thought it was exhaustion. He had been quiet lately, thoughtful in that way he got when something was weighing on him, but I trusted his silences. I had learned long ago that some things reveal themselves only when they are ready. After Mass, the church began to empty. There's a particular sound when a congregation disperses. The echo of shoes on stone, the whisper of coats brushing pews, the faint laughter of children being hushed by their parents. I always stayed behind for a few minutes, letting the stillness settle again after the crowd left. That morning, I lingered near the side aisle, running my fingers along the edge of the wooden pew, tracing the tiny grooves carved by time and devotion. I don't know why, but my heart felt heavy, as if something unseen had already begun to shift. I was about to leave when I heard my name spoken softly behind me. "Could I have a word with you, please?" It was Father Gabriel. His voice was gentle but carried a tension I'd never heard before, like a note struck slightly off-key. I turned, expecting to see the calm, warm expression he always wore, the one that made you feel safe, understood. Instead, I found his eyes clouded with something else entirely. Worry, hesitation, even fear. He waited for the last of the parishioners to exit before gesturing for me to come closer. I walked toward him, the sound of my footsteps echoing faintly against the high ceilings. When I reached him, he didn't speak right away. He simply looked at me for a long moment, as though weighing something invisible between us. "Your husband's confession," he said finally, lowering his voice, "was disturbing." The word hit me like cold water. I felt the air leave my lungs for a moment. Disturbing. It didn't make sense. Michael? My husband who apologized to stray cats, who brought coffee to my bedside every morning, who had cried when he found a baby bird fallen from its nest. I stared at Father Gabriel, waiting for him to continue, but he hesitated, glancing toward the confessional booth as if it might be listening. "I can't tell you what he said," he added quickly. "You understand that. The seal of confession is sacred. But," his voice wavered, "I felt compelled to speak to you. There are times when the burden of what we hear must be balanced by the duty to protect." Protect? The word made my heart pound harder. Protect from what? From my husband? Or for him? "I don't understand," I whispered. He looked down for a moment, his hands clasped tightly together, the veins on his knuckles standing out. "I wish I could say more. But I need you to be careful, my child. Pray with him tonight. Talk to him. Listen closely to what he says and what he doesn't." His gaze met mine again, and there was a sorrow in his eyes that chilled me. Sometimes the people we love most carry shadows they no longer recognize as their own. He blessed me quickly, almost hastily, and turned away. I wanted to call after him, to demand answers, but my voice wouldn't come. The weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating in their vagueness. My thoughts raced, 100 explanations competing for reason. Maybe Michael had confessed to something trivial that sounded worse than it was. Maybe Father Gabriel had misunderstood. Or maybe, and this was the thought I refused to let breathe, maybe there was something truly dark buried inside the man I thought I knew better than anyone. When I stepped outside, the world felt sharper, louder, colder. The sunlight seemed to glare rather than shine, and the wind carried the faintest chill of oncoming rain. Michael was waiting by the car, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. He smiled when he saw me. That same soft, easy smile that used to make me feel safe. Now it felt like a mask. "Everything okay?" he asked. I forced a smile in return. "Yeah, Father Gabriel just wanted to talk about the choir schedule." The lie slipped out before I could stop it. I don't know why. Maybe because saying the truth, that the priest had just called my husband's confession disturbing, felt impossible. Maybe because I was afraid of what his reaction might reveal. He nodded, started the car, and we drove home in silence. The road wound through the edge of town, fields rolling out on either side, sunlight flickering through the trees. I kept sneaking glances at him, searching for cracks in his calm expression. He seemed relaxed, even peaceful. He hummed along to the radio, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. But every so often, his eyes would flick toward the rearview mirror, as though checking for something, or someone, behind us. When we got home, he carried the groceries inside and started making lunch as if nothing had happened. I tried to act normal, but Father Gabriel's words looped endlessly in my mind. Disturbing. Protect yourself. Shadows. I moved through the kitchen like a ghost, watching him chop vegetables, the knife glinting in the light. I noticed small details I'd never paid attention to before. The precision of his movements, the quiet focus, the way he seemed somewhere else entirely even when he was right in front of me. At one point, he looked up and caught me staring. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone soft, curious. "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on mine a little too long, as if he could see through the lie. That night, as we sat together watching television, the normalcy felt forced. He laughed at the show, but his laughter didn't sound right. Too measured, too deliberate, as if he were performing. I found myself wondering what he'd said in that confessional booth. Had he confessed to something criminal? To hurting someone? To planning something? Or worse, to something that involved me? The thought made my stomach twist. When he went upstairs to shower, I stayed in the living room, staring at the flickering screen, the sound fading into background noise. I could almost still hear Father Gabriel's voice echoing in the back of my mind. "Be careful. Listen closely." I turned off the TV, and the house plunged into silence. In that silence, I realized how little I actually knew about what Michael did when I wasn't around. We'd been married 8 years. I thought I knew every inch of his heart. But now, every memory, every tender gesture, every small habit, felt like it might hold a secret meaning I had never seen. I thought of the nights he stayed late at work, the long walks he took after dark, the locked drawer in his study that he'd always said was just receipts. My curiosity began to blur with fear. I stood outside the bathroom door, hearing the water running, his silhouette moving faintly behind the frosted glass. For the first time, the sound didn't comfort me. It felt distant, almost alien. When he came out wrapped in a towel, he smiled and kissed my forehead. "You okay?" he asked again. "Of course," I said, lying again. But as I lay beside him later, watching him fall asleep, I couldn't stop staring at the rise and fall of his chest. Every breath felt like a question. I wanted to reach out, to shake him awake and make him tell me what he'd said in that booth, but fear held me still. What if I didn't want to hear the answer? At some point, I slipped out of bed and went downstairs. The clock in the kitchen read 2:47 a.m. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the streetlight outside. I poured a glass of water, but didn't drink it. My hands were trembling. I felt like something unseen was watching from the corners of the room, waiting. That's when I saw it. The edge of an envelope sticking out from under the stack of mail on the counter. It was addressed to him, from the diocese. Unopened. My heartbeat quickened. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew that. But my hands moved before my mind could stop them. I slid the letter out just far enough to see the seal, the faint embossed cross on the back. I didn't open it, but the unease that crawled through me was enough. Whatever was inside, it wasn't something he wanted me to see. I returned the letter exactly as it was and went back upstairs. He was still asleep, his face calm, peaceful. I stood there for a long time, just watching him, wondering who he really was when he wasn't Michael, when he wasn't my husband, my confidant, my safe place. Have you ever felt that? The slow, creeping fear that the person you love most might be hiding something terrible from you? That their silence isn't peace, but the sound of secrets burying themselves deeper? Tell me in the comments what you would have done if you'd heard what I heard that morning. If your priest had whispered that the person sleeping beside you might not be who you think they are. I didn't know then how deep this would go, how far the truth would stretch. But that night, lying in the dark beside him, I made a silent promise to myself. I would find out what he confessed, no matter what it cost. And that decision, quiet, trembling, born from love and fear, would change everything. Sleep that night came in fragments, bursts of shallow dreams that dissolved the moment I tried to grasp them. I woke before dawn, my heart already racing, the air in the bedroom thick and still. Michael was still asleep beside me, his face turned toward the window, bathed in the soft gray light of morning. There was something unsettling about the stillness of him, the way his expression seemed peaceful, yet unreadable. I used to love watching him sleep, but now it felt intrusive, almost dangerous, like observing something fragile that might turn on me if I looked too long. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him, and went downstairs. The house felt heavier than usual, every floorboard creak sounding too loud. I made coffee just to fill the silence, watching the dark liquid swirl in the mug, but the comfort it once brought was gone. As I sat at the kitchen table, Father Gabriel's words replayed in my head again, disturbing, protect yourself, listen closely. It was as though they'd been burned into my consciousness. I wanted to believe I'd misread his tone, that maybe he'd only meant it spiritually, not literally. But the fear in his eyes, that raw, human fear, was impossible to forget. When Michael finally came downstairs, the smell of soap and aftershave followed him. He greeted me with a kiss on the forehead, as he always did, then poured himself coffee. "You're up early," he said, glancing at the clock. "Couldn't sleep?" I shrugged, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" he asked. His voice was casual, but there was something measured in his gaze, like he was listening not to my words but to the spaces between them. "Oh, I said, waving my hand. "Life, work, the usual things." He smiled faintly, but the moment stretched too long before he spoke again. "You worry too much. I learned that from you," I said lightly, and for a split second, something flickered across his face, a quick tightening of the jaw, a look that vanished as soon as it appeared. We ate breakfast together, the silence between us growing thicker with every passing minute. I wanted to ask him about his confession, to just rip the truth out of him, but fear kept me still. If I asked, he'd know that Father Gabriel had said something, and that would mean betraying the priest's trust. And yet, wasn't my own trust already crumbling? When he left for work, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the street. The moment he turned the corner, I grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my contacts and found Father Gabriel's number. I hesitated for a long time before pressing call. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm but weary. "Hello? Father, it's me," I said quietly. There was a pause. "I hoped you wouldn't call," he said softly. "That would have meant peace." "Peace?" I echoed. "You told me my husband's confession was disturbing. You told me to protect myself. I can't just pretend nothing's wrong. I need to know what you meant." His sigh was long and heavy. "I can't break the seal. You know that." "Then give me something," I pleaded. "Anything. You can't just say something like that and leave me to guess what it means." The line was silent for a moment. When he finally spoke again, his voice was lower, more fragile. "I can't tell you what he said, but I can tell you this. Whatever he confessed wasn't about something he did. It was about something he believes. Something he thinks is true." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "Sometimes," he said, "sin isn't in the act. It's in the conviction behind it. Be watchful." Before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse pounding. Something he believes. That single word shifted everything. Belief was more dangerous than action. Belief could justify anything. It could twist love, reshape reality. I thought of the strange look on Michael's face lately, the nights he stood at the window long after midnight, staring out at nothing. I thought of the locked drawer in his office, the unopened letter from the diocese. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to distract myself, cleaned the house, ran errands, answered emails, but my thoughts kept circling back to him. Around 3 in the afternoon, curiosity finally won. I went into his study. The air smelled faintly of cedar and ink. His desk was immaculate, every pen lined up perfectly, papers stacked in neat piles. My eyes went straight to the drawer he always kept locked. I crouched down and tugged the handle. Still locked. I checked under the blotter pad, behind the framed photo of us on our wedding day. Nothing. But then, when I lifted the small wooden box he kept by the lamp, I heard a faint clink underneath. I flipped the box over, and there it was. A tiny brass key taped to the bottom. For a moment, my hand hovered over the lock. Every instinct screamed that this was a violation, that I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But then I thought of Father Gabriel's face, the tremor in his voice, and I turned the key. The drawer slid open smoothly, almost too easily, as though it had been waiting. Inside was a small notebook bound in black leather, a few loose photographs, and a folded piece of paper with a symbol drawn in red ink, a circle with 3 intersecting lines. The sight of it made my stomach twist. I opened the notebook. The first page was filled with handwriting, Michael's, unmistakably. But it wasn't his usual tidy, deliberate script. The letters were jagged, uneven, as though written in haste or agitation. "There is no death," the first line read. "Only return. The blood carries memory. The voice calls again in dreams." My hands went cold. I turned the page. More words, scattered, fragmented. Drawings of the same strange symbol. Notes about awakening and the bridge between flesh and spirit. Dates and times that meant nothing to me. And then one phrase repeated over and over. "She doesn't remember. Me." I slammed the notebook shut, my breath coming fast. What was this? A delusion? Some kind of obsession? Or something worse? The photographs beneath it caught my eye next. I lifted them carefully. The first few were ordinary. Church gatherings, landscapes, an old photo of the town from years ago. But the last one made my blood run cold. It was a picture of me. Not recent. I was younger, maybe 19 or 20, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. The photo was old, worn at the edges, and in the corner, written in Michael's handwriting, were the words, "Before she knew." The room spun. I dropped the photo and stumbled back, clutching the edge of the desk for balance. What did that mean? Before she knew? Knew what? I quickly returned everything as it was, closed the drawer, locked it, and taped the key back under the box. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I left the study and went to the living room, sitting on the couch in the dim light, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't even realize hours had passed until I heard his car pull into the driveway. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Act normal? Confront him? Run? When he walked through the door, I forced myself to smile, but my face felt stiff, unnatural. "Hey," he said, setting down his bag. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just tired." He studied me for a moment, then smiled and kissed my cheek. "You should rest. You've been tense lately." "I'm fine," I lied. That night, we ate dinner together, and I could barely swallow. Every word he said sounded rehearsed, every movement deliberate. I kept thinking about that notebook, those strange sentences, that photo of me from before we even met. And as I looked at him across the table, I realized something. The man sitting there wasn't the same man I'd married. Or maybe he was, and I'd just never truly seen him before. Later, after he went upstairs, I slipped outside for air. The street was empty, the night eerily quiet. Across the way, the church stood silhouetted against the moonlight, its spire piercing the sky. Without really deciding to, I found myself walking toward it. The doors were unlocked. They always were. Inside, the church was dark except for the red glow of the sanctuary lamp. I knelt in the front pew and bowed my head, though I didn't know what I was praying for. Maybe courage, maybe clarity. The silence pressed against me, heavy and alive. Then, softly, I heard footsteps. I turned and saw Father Gabriel standing at the back, his face pale in the candlelight. "I thought you might come," he said quietly, walking toward me. "Father, I found something," I whispered. "In his study. I know you can't tell me what he said, but whatever this is, it's not normal. He's writing about things. About me. Things that don't make sense." He closed his eyes briefly as if the words pained him. "You shouldn't have looked," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only sorrow. I had to, I said, my voice trembling. You told me to be careful. Please, tell me what's happening. Is he sick? Dangerous? He hesitated for a long time before answering. Sometimes, he said slowly, belief becomes possession, not by spirits, but by the self, by obsession. I've seen it before. A man convinced he hears the voice of God when it's only his own madness echoing back at him. But your husband, his conviction is stronger than most. And conviction, he said, looking at me gravely, is the most dangerous form of faith. The words sent a chill through me so deep it felt like ice in my bones. Then what do I do? I asked, my voice cracking. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You must not confront him yet. Watch. Wait. And above all, don't let him know you're afraid. His eyes searched mine, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear there. Not for himself, but for me. When I left the church, the wind had picked up. The sky was thick with clouds, and the first drops of rain began to fall. I walked home quickly, my thoughts spinning. When I reached the door, I froze. Through the window, I could see him standing in the hallway, perfectly still, staring at the front door as if he'd been waiting for me. Where were you? He asked when I stepped inside. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp, studying me. I couldn't sleep, I said softly. Went for a walk. In the rain? I needed air. He said nothing, just stared for a moment longer before finally nodding. You should dry off, he said, turning away. As I closed the door, my hands trembling, I realized something terrifying. He didn't ask where I'd gone. He already knew. And that was the moment I understood. Whatever this was, whatever he believed, it was only just beginning to reveal itself. Would you have gone back into that house? Would you have faced him, knowing something was coming? Something you couldn't name yet but could feel breathing just beyond the edge of understanding? Because I did. And I wish I hadn't. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The ticking of the hallway clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint creak of the ceiling as the wind pressed against the roof. But what haunted me most wasn't the noise. It was the silence that came after. It was the feeling of being watched, not by some supernatural presence, but by something painfully human. The man lying just a few feet away from me, whose breathing was too steady, too controlled, as though he were pretending to sleep. I lay motionless for hours, staring at the faint outline of his back in the darkness, feeling the distance between us stretch like a void. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that if I closed my eyes, something would change. Not outside me, but inside. Something in my understanding of who he was and who I'd been to him. When dawn finally came, the air in the bedroom was cold. Michael rose before I did, wordless, moving through his morning routine with mechanical precision. There was something eerie in the predictability of his motions, the brush of his teeth, the way he folded his sleeves, tied his shoes, poured his coffee, all like choreography rehearsed 1,000 times. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, wondering if I'd ever really seen him before, or if I'd only ever watched the version he wanted me to believe in. He noticed my stare and smiled faintly, that practiced, harmless expression that no longer fooled me. You should eat, he said. You look pale. I'm fine, I murmured, though my hands were trembling as I lifted my cup. He lingered for a moment longer, his gaze holding mine, then turned and left for work. The sound of the front door closing behind him felt like a reprieve, temporary, fragile, but necessary. I sat in silence for a long time, clutching my coffee as if the warmth could anchor me. Then I went back to his study. I didn't touch the drawer this time. I didn't need to. I just stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. The symmetry, the stillness, the faint smell of cedar and ink. It felt like stepping into a mind meticulously arranged to keep chaos contained. On the desk, I noticed something I hadn't before. A small leather-bound Bible, lying open. I stepped closer. The passage was marked in red ink, John 11:25. I am the resurrection and the life. Beneath it, in Michael's handwriting, a note. He returns through her. My throat went dry. I flipped through the pages. More notes, more scribbled phrases in the margins. Cycles repeat. Dreams are fragments of before. She must remember. I didn't understand what any of it meant, but the deeper I read, the colder I felt, as though his words were leaching something from me. Then I noticed the photograph again, the one of me, young, standing before that unfamiliar house. I lifted it, studying every corner, every shadow. This time, I saw a faint figure in the background. A man, barely visible, standing by the window behind me. The image was too blurred to recognize, but something about his posture, his height, his presence, it looked like Michael. My stomach twisted. The photo was clearly older than our marriage, older than when we'd met. How could he have been there? I put the photo back and stumbled out of the study, heart pounding. I needed answers. Real ones, not warnings or cryptic half-truths. So I did the only thing that made sense. I went back to the church. The air outside was biting, the sky an unbroken sheet of gray. By the time I reached the church steps, my breath was coming in clouds. The doors were unlocked, as always, and the smell of incense hit me the moment I entered. The sanctuary was dim, lit only by a few candles flickering near the altar. Father Gabriel was there, kneeling, his head bowed in prayer. He didn't look surprised when I approached, only tired, as if he'd been waiting for me. "I told you to wait," he said softly, without looking up. "I found the notebook," I said, my voice shaking, "and the photo. You knew, didn't you? You knew he's not right." He finally lifted his gaze, and in it was something I hadn't expected. Pity. "Yes," he said quietly. "I knew, but it's worse than you think." "Then tell me," I demanded. "Tell me the truth." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Your husband came to me weeks ago. He said he was having visions, memories of a life that wasn't his. He believed God was revealing something through him. At first, I thought it was stress, exhaustion, maybe delusion. But then he started speaking of you, of how you were part of it, how you carried something he had lost. He said he recognized you not from this life, but from another." I felt dizzy. "That's impossible." I told him the same, Father Gabriel said, but he was convinced. He spoke of bloodlines, rebirth, prophecy, words I'd only ever heard from those who've fallen too far into obsession. I tried to reason with him, but he said confession wasn't for forgiveness. It was for preparation. "Preparation for what?" I whispered. He closed his eyes. "For your death." The world tilted. I grabbed the back of the pew to steady myself. No, you're wrong. I wish I were," he said. "He believes that through your death, he can restore something divine. He called it returning the vessel." I shook my head violently, refusing to let the words sink in. "He wouldn't hurt me. He loves me." "Love can be twisted," Father Gabriel said, "especially when it becomes a religion of its own." I stumbled back a step, my breath shallow. My mind screamed to deny it, to find logic, to call it hysteria. But deep down, I knew. I'd felt it for weeks. The tension, the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, the strange calm in his smile. "I have to go," I said, turning toward the door. "Wait," the priest said urgently. "Don't confront him alone. Stay somewhere safe. I can—" But I didn't listen. I ran. The sky had turned to steel by the time I reached home. His car was already in the driveway. My heart pounded as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was silent, too silent. "Michael?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I moved through the hallway, every step heavier than the last. Then I heard it, faint, rhythmic, coming from upstairs. A voice. His voice. I crept up the stairs, the sound growing clearer. He was speaking softly, almost chanting. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting across the hallway. I pushed it open slowly. He was kneeling by the bed, the Bible open in front of him, the strange symbol from his notebook drawn on the floor in chalk. Candles surrounded him, their flames trembling. He turned his head slightly when he heard the door, smiling as if he'd been expecting me. "You came," he said softly. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Finishing what was started," he said, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "You've felt it too, haven't you? The dreams, the memories. You know this world isn't all there is." I shook my head. "Michael, this isn't you. You need help." He rose slowly, every movement deliberate. "Help?" he repeated, almost laughing. "You still don't see it. You were chosen, long before either of us were born. You've carried the memory, and now it's time to return it. Return what? He smiled, serene and terrifying. Life. He took a step toward me, and instinct took over. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. Stay away from me, Michael. But his expression didn't change. Don't be afraid, he said. You'll see soon. You'll remember. Then, from downstairs, a sudden noise. A door opening. Footsteps. Father Gabriel's voice calling my name. Michael's head snapped toward the sound, and in that instant, something raw and animal flashed across his face. He lunged toward me, but I darted aside, grabbing the lamp from the nightstand and swinging it instinctively. It crashed against his shoulder, sending him stumbling. I bolted for the hallway, screaming, "Father! He's here!" The next few moments were chaos. The sound of footsteps thundering on the stairs, the priest bursting through the doorway, Michael shouting words that made no sense, his voice thick with madness and devotion. Father Gabriel tried to reason with him, his hands raised. Michael, stop. This isn't God's voice you're hearing. It's your own fear twisting faith into something else. But Michael's eyes were wild, unrecognizing. You don't understand, he said. It's already begun. He grabbed the candle from the floor, flinging it toward the curtains. The fabric caught instantly, flames licking upward. Smoke filled the room, thick and choking. Father Gabriel shouted for me to run, and I did. Down the stairs, through the hallway, the heat rising behind me. I heard them struggling above, the thud of footsteps, the sound of something breaking. I burst out the front door just as the first flames reached the landing. The air outside was cold and sharp, the sky alive with orange light. Neighbors began to shout. Someone called for help. I turned back toward the house, panic clawing at me. "Michael!" I screamed. "Father Gabriel!" Then, through the window, I saw them. The priest trying to pull Michael away from the fire. Michael fighting him, his face twisted with desperation. For a moment, our eyes met through the smoke. He looked almost calm again, almost human. Then the ceiling gave way. The sound that followed wasn't a scream, but something quieter, like a breath being released. I don't remember falling, but when I came to, I was on the grass, someone pulling me away from the burning house. The night was filled with sirens, shouts, and the relentless crackle of fire. I searched the flames for any sign of them, but there was nothing left to see. Hours later, as the fire trucks cleared and dawn crept back over the horizon, a firefighter approached me. "We found 2 bodies," he said gently. "One male, one older." I nodded numbly. There was nothing left to say. But as I stood there, staring at the ruins of my home, a single thought clawed its way through the numbness. What if Father Gabriel had been wrong? What if Michael wasn't delusional? What if he wasn't finished? And when the wind shifted, carrying the faintest whisper of smoke and ash, I swear I heard his voice again, low, steady, close enough to feel against my ear. "You'll remember." The fire consumed more than our home that night. It swallowed a decade of memories, laughter, promises, and photographs that once defined my life. When the flames finally died, only the skeleton of the house remained, blackened beams rising like the bones of something ancient. The air smelled of smoke and sorrow, but also of something strangely cleansing, like the air after a storm that has finally broken. I stood in the ashes as the sun began to rise, its light spilling across the ruins in fragile gold. I thought of Michael, the man I had loved, the man I had feared, the man I still could not entirely condemn. He had been lost to something beyond him, something that had taken root where faith should have rested. And yet, beneath all the madness, I couldn't help but wonder if part of him truly believed he was saving me, not destroying me. That thought haunted me more than any nightmare could, because love and delusion, when intertwined, can look almost the same in the light. The police called it an accident. Faulty wiring, they said, though I could hear the doubt in their voices. They didn't know what to make of the strange symbols scorched into the floorboards, the notebook half burned but still legible in places, or the Bible, miraculously untouched, lying open to the verse that had obsessed him. "I am the resurrection and the life." I didn't tell them about Father Gabriel's warning, or the things I had found in Michael's study. I let them build their story because the truth, the real truth, was too fractured to explain. It existed somewhere between belief and madness, between devotion and destruction. And in the middle of that chasm stood me, the one left behind to make sense of it all. For weeks after the fire, I couldn't sleep. Every night, I woke to the faint crackle of phantom flames, the echo of his voice whispering from the edges of my dreams. You'll remember. Sometimes I would see him in the corner of my vision, not a ghost exactly, but a presence, a feeling, like the air thickening before a storm. I told myself it was trauma, that my mind was rewriting fear into something tangible, but deep down, I wasn't sure. When you live long enough beside obsession, its echoes linger in you long after its source is gone. It's like smoke, invisible but suffocating. One morning, I went back to the church. It was quiet, empty except for the distant hum of an organ being tuned. I lit a candle for both of them, for the man who'd lost himself to faith, and for the priest who had tried to save him. As I watched the flame flicker, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. There are some truths we aren't meant to understand, only to survive. Father Gabriel had once told me that faith and fear are separated by a single breath, and for the first time I understood what he meant. Faith is what you reach for when reason fails. Fear is what happens when it answers back. I moved to a small apartment on the edge of town after that, a quiet place where no one knew my name. I started writing, not about Michael, not directly, but about the spaces between what we believe and what we become when those beliefs consume us. Each word felt like exorcism, a slow untangling of the person I had been. Sometimes, when the night is especially still, I light a single candle and watch the shadows move along the walls, and I think about him, not as the man who hurt me, but as the man who couldn't escape the voice that had promised him something greater. I found one last thing in the wreckage weeks later, a piece of scorched metal, small and unrecognizable, until I realized it was the frame of our wedding photo. The picture itself was gone, burned away completely, but the outline remained, blackened, but intact. I keep it on my windowsill now, not as a reminder of tragedy, but as proof that even in fire, something endures. That's what survival is. Not escaping the flames, but learning how to breathe inside them. And in the quiet moments, when the wind moves through the trees outside and the light filters in just right, I think I finally understand what Father Gabriel meant when he said, "Protect yourself." He didn't mean from Michael. He meant from the grief, from the guilt, from the temptation to let fear define the rest of my life. So I live differently now. I walk slower. I pray softer. I listen not for voices in the dark, but for the small, steady pulse of my own heart. Proof that I am still here, that I am still alive. Sometimes survival isn't loud or triumphant. It's quiet, almost invisible. It's a single breath after the fire goes out. It's the decision to keep walking, even when every step reminds you of what was lost. And it's the knowledge that love, no matter how it breaks you, can still lead you back to yourself in the end. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever loved someone so deeply that their darkness became your own, let this be your sign to let the ashes settle. You don't have to carry their ghosts forever. You are allowed to rebuild, even if the foundation is scarred. You are allowed to remember and still move forward. And maybe that's what he meant, in his own broken way. Not you'll remember as a curse, but as a mercy. Because memory is what saves us. It's what keeps us human. If this story found you tonight, let it remind you, no matter how dark things become, there is always something waiting on the other side of the smoke, something tender, something new. Healing isn't forgetting. It's choosing to live again, even when it hurts. So, take a deep breath, hold it for a moment, and let it go. And if you felt something in this story, even a spark, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the stories that break us are the same ones that help us find our way back to the light.